Well, again, thank you, church, for coming and spending part of your Sunday with us. And as we pick back up this week, our series in Mark, it's been a few weeks. And so when we left off last, we were in Mark chapter 8, and we ended at 21. And so picking up this week at Mark chapter 8, starting at verse actually 22. I told Courtney 21, so that's on me. So you're looking to go, why did he start at 21? That's my fault. Starting at 22 and going through here to the end of Mark chapter 8. But if you if you didn't refresh or if you don't remember exactly what we've come off of, and Jesus had just fed the 4,000. So he fed the 5, now he's fed the 4,000. And then we have his parable where he talks about the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod, and he talks about all of this. And then he gets into this moment where they come to Bethesda. And we have to remember as we look at Mark chapter 8 and even into chapter 7 before that, all of these events are happening just within hours of each other, right? It's so often we think about the ministry of Jesus and we forget the fact that his earthly ministry only lasted 3 years. And in that 3 years, things were happening not spread out because we think, oh, he fed the 4,000, then he took a couple of weeks off and he recovered. And then, no, it's literally he feeds the 4,000, they leave from that, and then the next day, as soon as they get into the next time, these things continue. And so we see, and starting at Mark chapter 9, Mark chapter 8, verse 22, it says this: Then they came to Bethesda, they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. And we don't know who this they is, but we're assuming it's friends or people that knew him. And so they begged him, Jesus, capital H him, to touch little h him, the blind man. And says he took the blind man by the hand, brought him out of the village, spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" 24, he looked up and said, "I see people. They look to me like trees walking." And again, Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes, and he saw distinctly. He was cured, and he could see everything clearly. And then he sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." And so yet again, we have another moment here where Jesus, folks impressed upon him the need for this person to see, and Jesus, showing grace and mercy, heals him. Right? Does this action, spits on his eyes, lays his hands on him, and heals him. And at first, it doesn't take, right? It's almost, it kind of, for those of you that are like me, I have contacts, and without contacts, all of you would be blurry. If you've ever gone to the optometrist, you know this moment, don't you? When you're sitting in the optometrist chair, and he's like, "All right, how does that look?" "Oh, it's a little fuzzy." "Okay, number 1 or number 2? Right? And they, "Oh, number 2. Okay, now 2 or 3. And they work you through all those different things until you kind of hearken in or harrow in what your vision's going to be or what your vision is, and they correct your vision. And so when I read this every time, I'm almost thinking like the optometrist, right? Like, how does it look? "Well, it's still a little blurry, Jesus." "All right, hold on, let me get in there and adjust a little bit here." And then at the end of it, he's healed. And so we have this moment, again, where Jesus heals someone, and the reality here is, and folks say all the time, "Well, was it because he spit on his eyes or because he touched him?" No, it's because he's Jesus, right? What healed him? Jesus did. The actions here we're not as much worried about, but the healing is what we're worried about. And then again at the end, we see where Jesus sends him home saying, "Don't even go into the village." He's not quite ready yet for this guy to go and start saying what happened or anything like that. And so it leads us to this moment. And so for me, when I was reading and when I've studied through this, yes, he provides healing to the man, and that's important, and it's important to the people that brought the man. But I believe Jesus was setting up this next part that we see. Because we get to 27, and it says, Jesus went out with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Words are hard today. And on the road, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And you talk about a loaded question, right? Because what have these disciples watched to this point, right? Number one, for a lot of them, he literally just walked up to them and said, or to all of them, he walked up to them and said, "Hey, let's go." And they just left their lives and followed him, right? No rhyme or reason, just, okay, this guy says we're going with him, we're going with him. And to this point, they've watched him feed people with fishes and loaves that there shouldn't have been enough. He's raised the dead, he's healed the sick, he's done all of these things. And now they're walking on the road, and Jesus asks that question: "Who do people say I am?" And I put myself in that, in that thought process for a minute if I'm the disciples, and it almost takes me back to childhood where, you'd get that loaded question from a parent, right? "Hey, what happened today?" "Who called?" Right? Like there was no note. Am I not aware of something? Do I not know? Is there information I'm not working with here, right? Because how obvious does a trap have to be before I realize I'm walking into it? And so we see here that Jesus asks this question, who do people say I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others, one of the prophets. And so it's that first statement by Jesus, right, that kind of sets up what he's doing here. First, he wants to know, who does everybody else say that I am? And I think that would be a question I would love to be able to kind of go and almost do kind of man on the street type interviews to ask people, who would you say Jesus is today? And see some of the answers we would get. But then the more important question for all of us is what Jesus asks next. But you, he asked them again, who do you say that I am? And I think that is the question for all of us today, is who do we say Jesus is? Because in today's world, if we do not say what is about to be said by Peter, then we have a problem. Because there is a lot of people that attend churches or are part of ministries, and we're going to use those words loosely today, that would not proclaim Jesus as the Messiah. They're going to proclaim him as a good teacher, he was a good person, he was a world leader, he was this, that, or the other, when the truth is, he is the Messiah. There is no other description that fits what he did other than that. And so when we look today, Jesus still kind of posing that question, God posing that question still to humanity today, who do you say that Jesus is? We get Peter's answer in 29. Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. And he strictly warned them to tell no one about him. So yet again, Jesus cares what the disciples think, what they know, but he's not quite ready yet for them to be proclaiming that out. The difference between them and us is we have no such problem today. Jesus has not told us as believers today to be quiet about what we're doing. In fact, he has told us the direct opposite of that. We have been called as believers in 2026 to preach the gospel to everyone that would hear it. In fact, our salvation is described plainly and cleanly as a light on a lampstand. And that Jesus talks about it, that no one would take their lamp or their light and cover it with a basket so that no one could see it. That would make no sense. And for us as believers today, it is the same thing. That if we know Jesus is the Messiah, if we know that Jesus is the truth, and we would say those things here, if we would confess those things here, that Jesus is Messiah, he is the way, we sing the songs, if we would say that here, then we better be saying it out there. We better be saying it in the world around us. We better be not just saying it, but living it in the world around us. Because when we say that word Messiah, what we truly mean is that he is the only way to salvation. He is the only way to heaven. And if we walk out of here and live our lives in such a way that we think other things, or we give the appearance that other things are okay other than Jesus, then do we truly believe that he is the only way? That we should live our lives, and we talked about this in Sunday school this morning, we should live our lives in such a way that people see the truth of the gospel and how we live, because we are the same people everywhere that we go. As we see in 31, Jesus following this, when Peter says that he's the Messiah, the understanding comes with that there's going to be a sacrifice made. The Messiah is going to pay a price. And we see here in 31, Jesus again teaching to the disciples, it says, then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, be killed and rise after 3 days. And so when we get to Easter, right, sometimes it's easy for us to think, oh, well, the disciples were scared because they didn't know what was going to happen. No, yes, they did. Jesus spent part of his earthly ministry warning them that these things were going to happen so that they would not be surprised. But as Joseph was talking to the kiddos this morning, we see here again, while he was talking, verse 32, he was openly talking about this. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Right? And we see this still today, right? You will see supposed ministries and churches that they flee from the full truth of the gospel. They love to talk to you about love and money and success and power and all of these things, but they get away from these things, the understanding that the entire point of Jesus' birth was to die. Right? And that's the thing, is we have to understand that. As much as we celebrate the birth of Jesus, we understand the only reason he had to come was to die on our behalf. There wasn't some sort of story arc that Jesus needed to do to be completely Jesus by coming to earth and dying. The entire reason Jesus is doing this is for us. Right? It is our fault that this has to happen. And so you can imagine being Peter here, right? Like, you can imagine him taking Jesus and be like, Jesus, like, you're scaring the boys. All right? Like, the boys are nervous. You're telling them you're going to die. They're not ready for that yet. Like, we shouldn't be talking about this. That's not, we just need to just tone down the rhetoric a little bit, right? Like, let's just talk about the good things. Right? Let's just talk about the fun. Let's talk about the miracles. Let's not talk about this whole rejection and death thing, right? Because you're going to be a king. The boldness of Peter in this moment, right? I mean, you think about that, and the standard I would give on this is I imagine, you think about being a kid again, right? Imagine being a kid in kindergarten or in first grade, and your teacher's teaching, and you have the gumption to stand up to that teacher and be like, Miss, I think you're doing this wrong. Right? I think you're getting this wrong. Right? Now, you imagine being a kindergartner or first grader having the gall or the gumption to get up there and do that. Right? Now, the teacher's in this, I can see Janet Beth back there going, she's thinking of kids in her head already that either have done this or might have done it. Right? Blake did it. So, you imagine the bravery to do that. And here we see that Peter doing this to Jesus. Now, remember, we have to, remember what Peter's seen to this point, right? As we talked about earlier, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. He just watched Jesus heal a blind man. He's watched Jesus do all of these things. And now he has the gall or the gumption to look at Jesus and go, hey, when we see that rebuke, Peter's kind of hot. When that word rebuke used in the New Testament means Peter was upset. He was frustrated with Jesus, with the language he was using. Right? And so you imagine Peter saying that and rebuking him. And for us, though, the understanding here that this is our fault. Right? The entire reason Jesus has to do this is on us. All right? You think about that as an adult. As an adult in this room, for me personally, when I think about this, that, man, if I've done something wrong, I don't ever want the consequence to fall on someone else. Right? If I've done it, it's on me. If it complicates someone else's life, I feel even worse. But here, realizing that the entire reason Jesus has to do what he does is because of me. And there's nothing I can do in my humanness to fix it. Right? That's the issue for us in our humanity, is that the reason Jesus has to talk about this is because all of us are sinful. All of us are fallen. And there is not a thing about it we can do inside of our human condition. We cannot fix this problem on our own. But when we think about Jesus, never once do we see that Jesus holds this over our head. Never once do we see Jesus complain about, man, the only reason I got to come to this place and suffer and live miserably is because you people couldn't get the job done. Never once do we see Jesus in his earthly ministry go, man, God should have just took Adam and Eve and just ended it. Never once do we see him sit there and say, I don't want to do this, but you people couldn't fix it right. It's part of the grace and the mercy that Jesus shows, and the proof that he is not human, that he is fully God, because only a truly, fully loving God could offer grace on this level. Right? We as a human, we're not capable. We're not. Right? You imagine being able to offer grace on this level where you, being completely innocent, completely holy, leave perfection to come and live in a place with people that actively talk out and mess with you, talk trash about you, set you up in traps, and then eventually put you on a fake trial and murder you in front of everyone, including your family. And you're doing this on their behalf? If you know that's the end game, I think most of us would be like, no. No. Let them live with it. Jesus offers us grace and mercy in himself anyway, showing even more his perfection. Because we see in 32, turning around and looking at his disciples, he rebukes Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan, because you're not thinking about God's concerns, but man's." And if we are not careful, we will fall into the same trap. We will begin to think about the concerns of humanity over what God has called us to do, and we will fall into this same trap, right? Oh, well, we need to keep the message, we need to make sure worship is a certain way so that way people feel comfortable or for this or that or for whatever reason. And the reality is, part of the time when we come to church, when we come and sit in a service, is we need to feel uncomfortable. It's called conviction, and it leads to change. There need to be moments where we sit and hear a service and we go, "Ooh, that cut a little deep," right? Or I love the old Baptist adage, right? "Oh, they're stepping on my toes," right? Sometimes it's not just that we need our toes stepped on. We need our whole dagnabbit foot jumped on.
Stomped on.
I like jump better. It's more violent. But I get where you're coming from. I agree. There we go. Jump, dance, stomp. Thank you, Fiona. And so when we look at this, though, if we are not careful, we fall into this trap where we begin to do things. And I've studied and looked at this thing, and I was not a Christian in the mid to early 90s. It was late 90s, early 2000s when I really became a Christian and started living for the gospel. But I've studied some of this stuff when we've looked at things through my seminary stuff. And one of the words or one of the statements that popped up a lot that really just bothers me is when people say, "Oh, well, we wanted our church to be seeker sensitive." And the idea was great. The understanding of being seeker sensitive was you wanted people to come in and feel like they were welcomed, which is great. I want that. But at the same time, when we come into a church, we better leave different than we came in. Because if we don't, we have not just wasted our time, we've wasted everyone's time. If we are not changing, if we are not becoming more like Christ as a people group in this room, then we are not doing ourselves any favors. And how do we get there? Because some of us, you might be sitting here and you might be going, "Okay, I get that. So what do we do?" Right? How do we become that? How do we become those people that then move the gospel forward, that we try, that we go out and we do the things we're called to do? And Jesus follows up into 34, giving us the instruction. He says, summoning the crowd along with the disciples, he said to them, "If anyone wants to be my follower, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." So just that right there. You want to be a person that impacts the world for the gospel of Jesus Christ? We deny ourselves, we take up our cross, and we follow Jesus. We live our life according to him. We deny ourselves, right? Deny those earthly pleasures. Deny those things. Seek Jesus and move forward. Which, again, Joseph got into this with the kids. Some of you might hear that and go, "Oh, well, Pastor Sean's about to say God doesn't like rich people." No, that is not what I'm saying. Timothy tells us that the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money, the love of. It's, again, back to a heart issue. God cares about your heart. If you are successful and profitable and you make a lot of money, but your heart is for Jesus, then he is fine with that. But if your heart and your desire and your love is only in your stuff or your property or your money or your job, then you are not denying yourself. You are worshiping yourself. We see this a lot in the school setting, especially right now at the beginning of the year, first 4 days of the school year, right, for the fall semester or for the spring semester. And you'll hear a lot of kids, and you can see worship of self in kids really easy. And when I pointed out to you in kids, you're going to be able to see it in adults a lot easier too, right? When kids come back from Christmas and you see them in that brand new outfit, talking about all the stuff they got. "Oh, well, this is Nike, and this is this, and this is this, and this is this." That is worship of self and stuff. And adults, we are just as guilty of it. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow Jesus. 35, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it." Now there's two things here. Number one, yes, the actual thought of losing your life on behalf of the gospel, being martyred for the faith. But there's also the understanding here that those that live their life like Jesus will lose their earthly appearance. When we begin to follow Christ, we lose the life the world says we should have, and we begin to live life according to Jesus. Which is why the world turns around and says things to Christians like, oh, well, it's so boring to live like you, or I just want to go have fun, or do this, or do that. And the world throws these things out there when the reality is, it's all garbage. It's not worth it. Because 36 tells us this, for what does it benefit a man to gain the whole world yet lose his life? For some of yours it probably says soul. What does it profit a man to gain the world but lose their soul? And I like that one a little bit better because there's more eternity with it. Because the world looks at life and goes, well, life is life. You live and you die and that's it. No, it's not. I like that question Joseph asked the kids earlier. Is there anything you'd be willing to trade for Jesus?
No.
And it's a fair question to all of us as adults in this room too. And I think the harder question for us as adults is this. Have you already made the trade? Have you already chosen to seek things of the world in place of Jesus? And yet you're still coming to church and you're still trying to live life. You're still trying to look like a Christian. But you know your heart is in your money. You know your heart's in your bank account. You know your heart's in your property. You know your heart's in your family. You know your worship is in all of those things that aren't of Him. This world is so temporary. It boggles my mind. To think how temporary this place is. And how much the things of this world don't matter. The old hymn tells us, right? The things of the world will grow strangely dim in the light of His beautiful grace. That when we realize that this world has nothing for us but temporary, the reality is the only thing this world has for us is pain. We should understand what Jesus is saying here when He gets to 37 and He says, what can a man give in exchange for his life or in exchange for his soul? Do you really think about that statement, right? What do I have to offer? Right? And when we look at the life of Jesus, when He was taken up on the mountain, right? He leads, He goes up the mountain knowing what's going to happen, that He's going to be tempted. And Satan tempts Him with all these things. And the funniest one of them all to me is when Satan looks at Jesus and says, hey, if you'll just bow to me, I'll make you ruler of all the worlds, right? And my thought on that is to me, it's funny, especially because of the way I look at it, right? That'd be like me breaking into your house, stealing your TV, and trying to sell it back to you. Right? How am I going to give you something? How am I going to sell something to you you already own? For us looking here going, what could we give Jesus in exchange for? How are we going to give Him anything when He already owns all of it? And so when we look at this, that question is not there for you to pose an answer of what you have to offer. It's for us to understand that there is nothing. There is absolutely nothing we have that God is going to take in exchange for our soul, because He already owns it all. 38 continues, for whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when He comes in the glory of His Father with the holy angels. And then we'll finish with verse 9, chapter 9, verse 1, where He says, and then He said to them, I assure you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come in power. So we see here when we look at this that there's nothing we can give in exchange. But if we call ourselves believers, we better be believers not just in this room on a Sunday. We better be believers 24/7. In fact, it should be more apparent when we're outside of this place than it is when we're in this place. I love the statement of this place is a hospital for the sick. We should come here after we have poured ourselves out completely to the world. After we have poured ourselves out to everyone around us, we should come in here to recharge, to fellowship, to recharge the batteries so that we can go do it again and then come back and recharge again. So for us, church, it's that challenge. Are we truly willing to take up our crosses? Are we truly willing to go walk the walk and live the life that God has called us to live? Or are we going to continue to be those things that later we'll see that Jesus talks about with the Pharisees? You whitewashed tombs. The appearance of faith, the appearance of salvation, but no substance. It is time for us, not just as Trinity Baptist Church, but as a Christian people group, to take up our crosses and go do the work. We need to quit waiting on others. So my challenge to you, church, number one, is if you've never taken up your cross, you've never accepted Jesus, that is absolutely step one. But if you're here and you've accepted Jesus, you don't get to put your cross down until you hear the words, "Welcome, good and faithful servant." Keep doing the work. There is no such thing as retirement in the earthly life of a Christian. You retire when you hear the words, "Welcome, good and faithful servant." Until then, we should be about doing the work of the gospel. Taking everyone with us that we can. Let us pray. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the ability to gather together, to study your word. God, I pray that we would not just hear the words of the gospel, but live the words of your gospel. That we would live according to the truth that you've set forth. That we would pick up our cross. We would follow you and we would live our lives according to you. Because you alone are salvation. There was nothing we could offer. Nothing we could give on our own behalf. You had to leave perfection and come in our place. God, I pray that we would walk out of this place different, that we would walk out of this place with a desire to take the gospel to those you have put in front of us, to those you have put around us, because you have put someone in front of each and every one of us in this room, that we would go and share the gospel with them, share the truth, that we would live our lives differently, because we would seek to be like you and nothing else. It's in your name we pray.